Welcome to another episode of the Strength Blog. My name is Philip Wildenstam. I'm a certified nutrition coach and a co-founder of Strength Blog.
And I am Daniel Richter, CEO of Strength Blog and a certified personal trainer. Here we are, Philip.
It's finally summer. What are we doing inside?
Yeah, I know, right? Working inside is going to be a thing of the past in the future. I'm telling you now.
Here in Sweden, we are not blessed with many good summer days in the year.
I know.
The weather
but we
outside,
got a lot of work lined up for us.
we do.
Because also in Sweden, we do get some nice leave for vacation during the summer. But you and I, we want to keep this podcast rolling with one episode per week. So we have planned out and mean to record a bunch of episodes to keep you, the listener, going throughout the summer. And our focus is kind of going to be on fundamentals.
Exactly. We're doing a whole series, and you could say that this episode kicks off the series, but then we're going to do more deep dives into the big six.
Exactly.
The big lifts like overhead pressing, bench pressing, deadlifts, squats, rowing, pull-ups. Did I miss anyone?
No, I don't know, the big six ones, but really fundamental movements that if you understand them, and I mean, it doesn't have to be the bench press, it could be any like chest pressing exercise, but if you understand them, you understand most of strength training. But before that, we're going to prelude it with talking about seven of the most important principles of highly effective strength training. I couldn't come up with more that sounded interesting, so 7 it is. And 7 is a good number in a headline.
Is it though?
Yes, it is.
Isn't it like 3 or 10?
No. You got like the top one maybe, and then you got 3, 5, 7, 10, and then it gets trickier. Yeah. Then it's almost like 20, and then 101.
You forgot 69.
Yeah.
Always gets people's attention.
So today, 7 principles of highly effective strength training. And they are not absolute truths. There are exceptions to them, and they are principles, guiding principles. But they're important. Some are more important than others, or maybe some are more important for different people, or different people have, different proclivity and how easy it is to follow a given principle, and then you might struggle with some other. But let's kick into it, knocking them down one after one. The first principle of highly effective strength training is the principle of progressive overload. What's that?
First off, I want to add that this could have been, if this had been a list with the top 1, this would have been top 1.
Yeah. Yes, it would.
This rules everything. Progressive overload means that you gradually increase the demands placed on your muscles.
Yeah.
So you add a bit of weight, you add a rep, you add a set, you do something you haven't done before to force your muscles to adapt.
Yeah. When you first begin exercising, or you just go for a longer walk than usual, your muscles, in scientific terms, they think to themselves, what is going on? And then they initiate a response, adapting to that stress so that you can handle that longer walk a little better the next time. And this is exactly what it is. But it is also the case that once your body has adapted, that stress doesn't really shake you anymore. It doesn't disrupt your homeostasis. So you need to increase the stress in order to keep triggering these adaptive responses. And that is progressive overload, meaning gradually overloading your muscles or whatever you want to challenge. The same goes for cardio training if you want to challenge your cardiorespiratory system.
And this is super easy in the beginning. It comes intuitively for most. But then when you're a year or 10 years in, it's so easy to forget. You get into a slump, you don't challenge yourself, and then also you don't get any new, better results.
Yeah, exactly. Because in strength training, we mostly apply progressive overload by adding weight, adding reps, or adding sets, maybe adding workouts. And as you said, in the beginning, it almost happens automatically. So you notice that, wow, I'm much stronger than my first session. So you slam on 5 kilos more than you used in last time, or you can do more reps in every set. And that kind of happens automatically for the first few weeks or months if you're thinking about it, before it starts to slow down and before it gets very uncomfortable trying to add more weight. Because as you get stronger, lifting your same old weight becomes really comfortable. So after a while, you might start to associate going to the gym with not really stressing yourself or not really getting uncomfortable. But unfortunately, effective training often includes you being uncomfortable.
Yeah, in one way or the other.
Yeah. So the method that you and I often preach and that is very effective is to, for instance, establish a few exercises that you're going to do, establish a number of sets and reps, maybe 3 sets of 10 reps, maybe 3 sets of 5 reps, and start with some light weight. And then if you can do all of those 3 sets of 5 reps, you add a little bit of weight for the next time. And if you can do it, you keep increasing, just like that. And this also requires you to track your training, which is, by the way, what our app Strength Log is built around. So use that for tracking your training. So that when you get into the gym, you look at what you did last time and you just try to do a little bit more. So I think long-time listeners of this podcast, they are familiar with this concept, but I do want to stress some exceptions to the principle of progressive overload, because as much as we always hammer home the point that you should try to lift more than your last workout, that doesn't really work in practicality beyond the first half year or something of your training. Then you need to start working in longer cycles, or you might need to add a high stress and then stay at that stress level for a while because it isn't really feasible to increase it anymore. And then maybe when you come out of that, you're going to be stronger. And I'm going to give an example. I've done on 2 occasions 100 push-ups per day for, I think one time I did it for 100 days and the other time I did it for 2 months or something. And I saw some really good bench press gains from that. So the stress that I introduced was the same all the time. 100 push-ups every day, didn't change. In fact, it probably got easier as it went along. But rather, the progressive overload was introducing that block of training at all. So the block of 100 push-ups per day. And the adaptations kept coming for 4 to 5 weeks or whatever. I kept getting stronger throughout all that time. So remember that even though you might, as a beginner, be able to increase the weight every workout, it doesn't mean that you're fully adapted at that point. It just means that you can go at a high pace. Yeah. But for someone who's been training for a while, maybe you need to introduce a higher stress and then just keep slogging away at that, letting your body adapt. So for instance, if you've been training for a long time and you've reached a point of maybe bench pressing 100 kilos for 3 sets of 5, maybe you need to repeat that workout several times before you can increase the weight a bit more, or however you want to do it.
Might start to feel a bit lighter. You might see some technical improvements in your lifting, and suddenly you feel like, oh, now I have adapted and I can add some extra weight. If you do more bodybuilding style of training, you're quite used to this, because a lot of exercises at the smaller end of the spectrum, like a bicep curl with dumbbells, this is happening continuously for you. You move up to, let's say, 16 kilo dumbbells, like 35 pound or something. And then you do 10 reps for each arms. And in the beginning, you might be, you're not doing them with the strictest form. But 2 months later, you're still using the same dumbbells. Maybe you've added a rep, or you're still doing 10s, but it looks much better. Because the jump up to 18 kilos is a really big jump percentage-wise. So you need to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is another way to apply progressive overload. It doesn't have to be weights, sets, and reps. It could be a stricter technique. It could be a technique where you shift the work to other muscles. It could be manipulating your rest times. So it doesn't have to be weights and reps, but that is probably the most common and maybe the most, instinctive and maybe even effective ways to adjust it. But definitely not the only way.
So, progressive overload. Yeah. That's a running theme in this podcast. Let's move on.
Yeah, I just want to finish one last time with saying that this is the most important one, but also the most difficult one.
Yeah.
And the one everyone is going to struggle with throughout their career.
Yeah, and then we ask for listener questions. So many questions are on this theme. They are not formulated like that, but it has to do with people being stuck in their training. And it always boils down to some sort of issue or difficulty with progressive overload.
Yeah, and a common occurrence for someone who has been lifting for many years is that most of the time they're not really applying progressive overload because it's really freaking hard.
It sucks.
But then maybe they do a stint of 2 or 3 months of progressive overload and pushing things hard and actually make some gains. And that is fine if you're lifting at the hobby level to ebb and flow like that. Sometimes you're pushing, sometimes you're relaxing a bit in your training. All right, let's move on.
Number 2.
Yeah, the principle of specificity.
Specificity.
Which is that you get better at what you do most of the time. So really what it means is that if you want to squat more, well, squat more. And if you want to get better at pull-ups, do more pull-ups. Because your body adapts in a myriad of ways to the movements, the loads, the tempos, the rest times that you do. It's very good at sniping the results connected to what you're doing. Even the range of motions and velocities to some degree. So if you want to get better at something, train that. And you're always going to see the biggest improvements in the thing that you train. So for instance, someone who is training the squat, they will probably get strong in the leg press as well, but relatively speaking, they will improve their strength in the squat even more. But that is the exception, that there is some carryover to similar movements. Because, I mean, say that you train in the squat, you are going to grow your quadriceps, so you might get stronger in leg extensions, and you will get better in the first parts of sprinting, because you're going to have stronger legs, and you are really doing sort of a squat extension movement in those sprint steps and against fairly high forces, at least in those few steps. So yeah, you're going to carry over a bit. But also, the principle of specificity isn't ironclad, because we talked about, I think we talked about it, a bench study from a while back where 3 groups trained the bench press either at full range of motion, going all the way down, or another group went 2/3 of the range of motion, so stopping midair and going back up again. And the third group just doing 1/3 of the range of motion before going up again, in a training program over a series of weeks. So according to the principle of specificity, the groups that trained, say, 1/3 of the movement would improve their strength most at that range of motion, and vice versa for all the other ranges. But what they actually saw in the study was that the group that trained with the full range of motion not only increased their strength most at the full range, but also at the partial ones. So they got stronger in 1/3 of the range of motion than the group that trained specifically on that. And same thing for 2/3 of the movements. So while it's a sound principle, it doesn't always apply.
So full range of motion, that's a hard recommendation.
Yeah, we're gonna get back to that, but it's a good stuff, man.
Yeah. I still remember when I trained the squat really hard for years and years because I wanted to compete in powerlifting, which I did, and the squat was my favorite and best lift. And then I started adding in hack squat machine. And I felt like a total beginner. Like I did, my legs were the weakest legs in the world. I put on like 40 kilos and it was hard for me because the movement was more different than doing squats and leg press or something like that. I always did low bar squats, so I'm more a forward lean, and in the hack squat machine you're more doing like an Olympic weightlifting squat.
More knee dominant.
Yeah. And it made me realize I had a lot of weak areas in my legs still.
Yeah. And that begs the question, does that mean that the hack squat is a good exercise for your squat or a bad one?
When I started adding the hack squat was because my powerlifting career was just over. I had decided to turn to bodybuilding. give bodybuilding a chance. And I did a hack squat for a year or two and got much better, but never close to my old squat numbers.
Yeah.
And then I see smaller guys at the gym putting up much bigger weights in the hack squat machine than I ever did. Never came natural for me.
Yeah, they're probably using steroids,
Yeah, of course.
So, more exceptions, if you'd call them that, to the principle of specificity. In the beginning, when someone who hasn't been training starts training, pretty much no matter what they do, they get better at everything.
Yeah.
So someone who begins cycling gets stronger in the squat, and someone who starts squatting gets better at slow jogging. So because like any stress is going to improve all of your capacities pretty much. But that stops after a while, and then you have to apply this principle of specificity and actually start training what you want to get better at.
Yeah.
Even though we see like people working around this in order to get more training volume in. So for instance, my push-ups in order to improve my bench press, not entirely specific, although the movement is very similar, but still led to some really nice gains. In the cardio world, we might see runners adding in cycling or maybe even swimming. No runners swim, but cycling. So yeah, there are exceptions. Let's move on to principle number 3, which is the principle of consistency.
This is a good one.
Yes, it is. So many people try to start training but drop off after a few weeks, or maybe they do like 2 workouts in 1 week and then after a month they do a third one and so on. Which is a good way to not get anywhere.
You could take a more extreme example. If you were to have let's say it's a dude, because we are dudes, who goes to the gym for like 3 months and he trains really hard. He's all in at the gym. He goes 5 times a week and he trains according to all principles. And another guy goes 2 or 3 times per week and not as much of an all-in personality. But the first dude, he stops training after 3 months, and then he starts thinking about going back half a year later and do the same thing over. The second guy, he will have reached much further by doing less but more consistently for a longer period of time.
Yeah. Better to do 2 workouts per week for year after year than 5 workouts per week for 2 months.
Exactly.
It's a night and day difference. So yeah, training thrives on getting these stimulus or these stress impulses regularly.
Yeah.
And well, if you stop applying the stress, then the adaptations are going to stop. And really getting into that rhythm makes such a huge difference. And that goes for many things. I mean, just for this podcast, when you and I committed to actually doing 1 podcast episode per week, we started seeing results in listener numbers instead of just doing it when we quote unquote had the time or felt like it. Commit to a schedule one way or the other, even if it's just 1 workout a week. It will make a huge difference.
Yeah, I would say that it's more important to find a reasonable workout schedule, something you think you can actually stick to. Then people set their goals too high. They aim for 5 days per week, and then they are only able to go 2 or 3 times per week, and then they feel like failures. And this routine is not working for me. It doesn't matter. I suck at this, and then they go back to no training instead of 2 workouts per week in the beginning. That's fucking perfect.
Yeah. When I pick a new training program that I want to follow from our app, that is one of the most important questions that I ask myself. Will I be able to regularly do these workouts without missing them? Oh, everyone misses a workout every now and then, but like on the regular.
Yeah. I'm not allowed to miss workouts right now because we are beta testing a streak feature for the app. It will be released during this summer sometime. I'm not sure when. We still have some work to do. But now I'm up to, I've added a streak that says I need to work out 4 times per week.
Yeah.
And I want to keep it going. And
I also added a streak. I haven't been doing any kettlebell swings, so I added a streak of doing 5 per week, doing them 5 times per week. And I set my goal way too high, so I failed, and now I'm still not doing any kettlebell swings. Instead of maybe setting the goal of doing them twice per week.
Yeah, that's a good example.
So exceptions to this principle. There is an exception that gains from strength training, they stick around for a really long time. If someone has been training for many, many years and they take a 2-month break, they're going to lose a lot of strength and muscle, but far from all the strength and muscle they have built up, and they're going to gain it back fast. So I see that sort of as an exception, at least for maintaining their strength levels. But I mean, if they want to gain strength and like break new ground, then they have to kind of recover that lost ground first after the break. But there are some interesting studies done on breaks in your training. So for instance, training 6 weeks, having a 3-week break, then training 6 weeks, having a break, and so on, showing that, well, gains are possible even in kind of that schedule. But it depends on how you structure it.
I'd argue that a person taking a 2-month break after years of training has already established a habit, so it's more of a low-risk move as well. They know what to do to get back into training compared to a beginner trying to establish a routine of training, where consistency will be even more important.
Yeah, the beginner trying to establish a routine needs to, in some form, almost make it holy. Like, you don't miss this. You do this no matter what. All right, we're moving on to number 4, the principle of individualization, which means to tailor your training for your body and your settings and your circumstances and your experience, your goals, if I didn't say that, and your recovery capacity. So make sure that you're not trying to follow something that's not suited for you or that doesn't align with what your goals actually are.
A classic example is, I've done this, you've done this, everybody has done this at some point. When I got started in the gym when I was like 14 years old, I bought a muscle magazine, and then I started doing Ronnie Coleman's routine. I was a total beginner. And
after you had reached his physique, what did you do then?
Thanks, Daniel. My confidence is at all-time high. No, but I quickly realized that I can't train like this. I didn't get any results, and I talked to one of the older guys in my football club about how I should train, and he just gave me a much simpler training program with progressive overload that I followed. And I became a lot stronger that way than following Ronnie Coleman's bodybuilding program as a 14-year-old boy without muscles.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's one of the things. Either you get the case that isn't Ronnie Coleman's training program, he is saying something to the journalist trying to write a paper. But even if it is his training routine, then he has probably developed that over his entire career to find what works for him, what works right now with the nagging injuries he might have at the time or the equipment he currently enjoys, and so on. So the exception here is what you kind of hinted at, that as a beginner, you should have less individualization in your program, because beginner programs suit almost everyone. But then as you learn more about training, you learn more about yourself, you notice what works and what doesn't, you notice what you like and enjoy and what you actually do, then you can introduce more individualization, not only for your particular body, but also for your goals. So it's a bit of a seesaw, that some individualization is good, but you should still follow the general good practices. And I mean, one example is my kids. They are now 8 and 10, and they're deeply into soccer and handball. And every now and then I'm reminded about the injury risk, especially to the knees in those sports. And I know that strength training kind of cuts that risk of knee injury in half. So I'm interested in having them do some simple leg strengthening exercises. And this is a case where I really don't much care about which exercise they do. The important point is that they do something. So it might be lunges or barbell squat or goblet squats with a dumbbell or a kettlebell. I just try to individualize it to something that they can perform well and that they enjoy and actually do. And then the goal of just building stronger legs can be fulfilled in many different ways.
Absolutely.
But yeah, as a beginner, don't really listen to this. Just follow our beginner programs. No, because I mean, you don't yet know what you can and can't do. Say a beginner who is interested in barbell training and checks out starting strength and finds that the barbell squat is really uncomfortable and difficult and tricky and complicated. Yeah, it is for a lot of people, but you don't know yet if you're able to learn it or if you can become good at it. So don't quit too early.
No,
basically.
power through.
Yeah.
No matter if you break your legs doing it.
No, there is a point of return, but try out the classics and then adjust. But sure, if some exercise hurts you or you really don't like it, swap it out to something else. And I mean, if you're just strength training because you want the benefits, no, you don't have to barbell squat. You can do a machine leg exercise instead or whatever you want to do.
So, speaking about swapping exercises. Number 5 on your list, variation, but not randomization.
Exactly, principle of variation. And this is the one on the list that is commonly cited when you're talking about training principles, but the one that I'm the most uncertain about or I have the most reservations about.
Explain.
Because this is not something that really is scientifically proven, but it still kind of feels right in a way, or at least that we as humans thrive on a bit of variation, and we don't thrive on monotony to at least some extent. So I looked back, and like half a year ago, we did one episode on a study looking into variation. I had almost forgotten about it, but it was a group of beginners, a group of women's doing 3 leg training sessions per week. And at every workout, they did 1 knee extension exercise and 1 knee flexion exercise. So 1 for the quads and 1 for the hamstrings. And one of the groups did the same 2 exercises every workout of the week. And the other group swapped them out. So they did, 3 different quad exercises and 3 different hamstring exercises. And the results in this case was that they gained exactly the same amounts of muscle and strength in the tested exercises. And also our notes on that was that, this was pretty much in line with our suspicions and what we see in general. So my point here is that when it comes to strength training, variation for variation's sake doesn't really have much evidence to back it up. I mean, in the few studies that show a benefit for variation, it's more about actually introducing another exercise that works a muscle differently than the one compared against, rather than the change per se. So that's like my objection for it. And where the support for this comes from is that it's a bit old school. Like the Soviet era of Olympic training in all sports, they were big on variation, planned variation. Like if you want to improve your shot put and you need a pressing exercise to strengthen that, maybe you do bench pressing for 6 weeks, but then you got to do dips, and then you do banded bench presses, and then you do like planning in advance to vary the exercises like this. And the more scientific side of me says that, no, that doesn't really matter. You can bench press all the time. And, as so often, I think there's a bit of truth to both.
Maybe, but an example I see a lot of in the real world is like, now I've been doing dumbbell chest presses for 6 weeks, so I need to switch it up because variation is good, and I've started to plateau. I can't pick up heavier dumbbells and continue my progression, so I'm going to the bench press now, and then I'm gonna do the shoulder press for 6 weeks or so, and it just feels like you're never giving anything a real shot of sticking, or getting through the sticking points, the plateaus in your training.
Yeah, becoming you're continuously a beginner instead.
Exactly, and it can feel really good going to a lift you haven't done for months, because you get a lot of quote-unquote beginner gains when you start it over. But then you start to get back to where you were 6 months ago, and it starts to feel just as heavy as it did 6 months ago. Yeah, you haven't progressed.
Because in a sense you want that plateau, or you want to reach that point where you actually need to stress your muscles.
and improve your technique, and just become a better lifter in that specific lift.
Exactly.
So I see a lot of that going on, and I will never be on that side that is a good strategy in the gym.
So that is like my data-driven standpoint. And then if we turn over to like the more hippie-driven standpoint, I have some respect for the fact that, well, there seems to be some sort of like natural cycles and rhythms in our bodies and our interests as well that maybe isn't entirely understood yet. So yes, sometimes if you feel like doing something else, maybe try and see if that works. I mean, sometimes something just clicks.
Hippie talk is loser talk, Daniel.
Yeah.
How are you gonna win a gold at the Olympics if you don't stick to your stuff?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Because I do think the universe is deterministic, meaning that if we could map out every like atom and electron, we could, and their move and their positions and vectors, we could predict what's coming. So I just think it's a question of not knowing yet or understanding everything. So I think there's this balance between simultaneously having to be consistent and disciplined and actually keep training the bench press 3 to 4 times per week if we want to get really good in the bench press, but also have an eye open for signs needing to change things up and maybe introducing some other exercise.
But you can talk about variation from another perspective. If you look at the really accomplished strength athletes in Olympic weightlifting or powerlifting, for instance, they do a lot of periodization in their training where they get variation from just training the same lifts but differently. They have
I'm doing 4s instead of 2s.
Exactly.
So exciting.
Look at the smile on their faces. No, we usually use that old quote, a change is as good as a rest. And once again, in my training, if I say that I want to improve a given lift and I have followed one of our programs for that lift, then maybe after one cycle of it, I feel like I need a change. So I look at another program for that lift that is same but different. Yeah.
We need more hippie studies on this.
I would just say that variation is fine. You can have some variation in your training, but make sure to also have a plan.
Yeah.
Don't just do variation for variation's sake. Stick to a plan. Give your body a chance to adapt. Have progressive overload goals in your training, and you will be more fine than someone just, today I don't feel like doing chest presses in the machine, so I'm going to do something I've never done before. And then the next time they have a chest day, they do something completely different. And they never learn the lifts. They never improve for real.
Yeah. My caveat there is that it slightly depends on the goals. Because what you described is inefficient for growing the chest muscles. But maybe that's not the first priority. Maybe the first priority is getting to the gym at all. In which case it might be more viable.
But if your goal is not to get a bigger chest, then your priorities are not right.
Yeah. And also, I just recalled, this episode is titled Principles for Highly Effective Strength Training. So that is the case for not fucking around with different exercises.
Exactly. Cool. Moving on.
Yes. Number 6 on our list is the principle of recovery. So, what good is an awesome, stimulating workout session if you ruin it by not setting things up for your body to be able to recover? You activate all these genes and trigger all these anabolic hormones in your workout, and then you screw it up by being deficient in sleep, not eating, being highly stressed, and taking in high doses of alcohol. It's all going to waste.
Regard the last thing he said there. There's zero scientific evidence that alcohol is harmful in any way.
That is not correct.
No, but this part of the manuscript has to do with the good stuff in life. Food and sleep.
Yeah, no, it has to do with highly effective strength training.
Yes.
Okay, I see a point.
and to get your results from your highly efficient strength training, you need to recover. And you recover by sleeping, stressing less, and eating enough calories, which are the keys to a good life.
Yeah. I always love the garden analogy here. If you have a plant that you want to grow optimally, you need to make sure that you check off all the boxes in that garden. Sunlight, warmth, water, fertilizer, everything. Just set up all the groundwork to enable nature to have its way.
Yeah.
And the same goes for your body. You stimulate and then you just take care of everything that's needed to grow. But everyone knows like the basic factors, like sleeping enough, eating enough. Stress is kind of the new kid on the block when it comes to recovery, but it's still a bit tentative and early on, but it seems to have a huge impact in our physiological recovery, even just the psychological stress.
Yeah.
But one of the bigger questions here is recovery time between workouts. Because we sometimes see people saying that you can't train a muscle every day, but then you consider, well, I'm walking every day. I squat down to the toilet and up again every day. That is
so many times per day.
Yeah. There isn't a switch that goes on that says now it is training and now it isn't. It's all just doses on a huge continuum.
Yeah.
And after a very hard workout, you might need 4 to 6 days of recovery before like your muscle damage is repaired, your performance is back on track, and your different hormones that indicate stress have returned to baseline. But if you do a very light workout, maybe just one set of a few reps, then the recovery time is less than a day. And then people might argue, but yeah, what's the meaning of such light workouts? But I've, on many occasions, done very light workouts daily and seen great results from that. So it can be training as well.
We talked about long distance runners like 2 episodes back. And when you look at the elite, they are out running basically every day.
Maybe twice per day.
Twice per day. And they have what they call like easy runs of only 30k at a slow tempo that for you and me that would kill us, but it's easy for them. And when you look at the best marathon runners in the world, they do an absolute majority of their running at a low tempo for them, just adding in reps, just adding volume, and then they have some harder runs as well.
Yeah, and same things can work in strength training.
Yeah.
When I did the daily push-ups, I added 20 pounds to my bench press and my pecs got a lot bigger from daily training. So it's all about finding which schedule you enjoy, principle of individualization and how you want to apply the progressive overload. But you can train anywhere from once per week to daily. But for most people, I think the best frequency is going to be somewhere in the middle of that, like 2 to 3 times per week for the lift or muscle that you want to really focus on growing. And then that is going to vary for different people. So you need to, in the spirit of individualization, need to find your recovery capacities or needs, really.
But if you're in a situation where you're working out, say, 4 hard workouts per week, and you're not seeing the gains you want to see, you're stuck at plateaus, and you're thinking about adding a 5th workout because
are we talking about the same muscle and movement or different?
Yeah, let's say you want to become a world class bench presser, so you bench 4 times per week. And you've built up your tolerance for that, but you've been at a plateau for a long while now, and you look at your training and you say to yourself, "Oh, I need to add a 5th bench workout," but then you don't take into consideration that you're working out in the evening, and after every workout you have a hard time going to sleep. So those nights you only sleep like 5 or 6 hours. Maybe an extra rest day or making sure you sleep longer would be more effective for your bench press results in that case. Getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night instead of 6 hours, because you would be able to recover more from the hard training you're already doing.
Yeah, that's the eternal dilemma of training hard. You don't know if you'll do better from increasing or decreasing the amount of training you do.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to find out because there's so many variables in place.
Yeah. But I'm pretty sure if you just had those 2 knobs, more training or more sleep, in this case, I think that more sleep would be beneficial.
Yeah, that's annoying.
I love sleeping. The older I get, the more I love sleeping.
It's been a while since I saw a sleep study on performance. There are a bunch of old ones where they have athletes like increase their sleep intentionally and they see crazy gains in whichever sport they're doing. But I mean, it takes a lot of time sleeping. I want to outsource it. I have stuff to do, man.
Yeah, well, I guess it gets easier if you're a professional athlete that gets paid for doing what you do in the gym or on a basketball court, for instance. There was this college basketball player study on sleep like 10 years ago or something, where they saw less injuries from sleeping more.
Yeah, exactly. And I think better accuracy and reaction and sprint times, lots of shit. But yeah, so eat enough. That is a bit underestimated, I think. Getting enough calories in, it's really helpful. But sleep, of course, stress, and then balancing the amount of rest. And before we leave this topic, we could also mention that you don't always have to be recovered between sessions. No. So in many of our strength training programs, they begin with like a dose of training that maybe lets you recover from workout to workout. Then the dose increases, so to the point where you're probably not recovered between each workout. And then you do that for 2 or 3 weeks. And then the stress lowers again, allowing you to recover and get back to baseline or hopefully over baseline and perform better. So that is also related to progressive overload. You can introduce a big stress that is more than you can recover from at the time, but then you back off again and get that recovery time back up. So yeah, man, there are many variables to strength training.
Yeah, if only we had a podcast where we could talk about them all.
Yeah. So to wrap up with number 7 is the principle of putting technique first.
Yeah, this is a hard one.
For some. If you use baby weights all the time, it's easy. Never pushing yourself. No, so the point of this is to lift with a good form, to target the right muscles in the right movement pattern in order to get better results and hopefully also avoid injury.
Yeah.
And the point here is to first learn the movement more or less correctly and then load it. So load comes second and the movement comes first. So for an example, if I were to introduce someone to the bench press, I would not slap on some weight plates from the get-go and watch them do half reps in the bench press. I would remove the weight to a point where the barbell is very light for them. An empty barbell might work for some people, and have them go all the way down and all the way up and start using that. And then I would add load when appropriate, but I would begin with the full movement. And then I would, of course, accept like all the beginner mistakes someone might do, like moving around and things like that. We would address those as we went on ahead. But the full movement in a fairly stable and controlled manner, that would be the first order of business. And then comes the load.
Yeah. In some movements, you need to actually feel some weight to be able to do them correctly. It's easier to do a good deadlift if it's not just an empty barbell for most people.
Yeah.
But don't stress adding weight, especially if you're a beginner to a lift. Because if we go back to progressive overload, if you add 2.5 kilo every time you do that lift, you're going to added a shit ton of weight in just a few months.
Yeah.
So you're going to be much stronger, and hopefully your technique will have developed in sync with your weight gains on the barbell.
Yeah, and you're also like creating your groove here, or cutting your groove. So you want to begin using the right quote-unquote technique from the beginning, so that you establish that mold or that template for the movement. Because if you do that, then later on when you start to challenge yourself with progressive overload, you can maintain that technique. And that is perhaps one of the most important reasons to put technique first, is that it gives you a standard for your progressive overload to like compare that to. So if you are lifting 52.5 kilos in the bench press now, and you lifted 50 kilos in the last workout, you're performing it in the same way, so you can compare that, yeah, I'm actually stronger now because I'm doing the movement in the same way with the same range of motion, fairly similar tempo, but I can use more weight. If you change things up all the time, you do quarter squats sometime and you do full squats another time, you don't really know if this is a bigger stress or a smaller stress, or if you're getting anywhere.
Most often those things happen in the same workout. You start out using good technique on the lighter weights, and then as you put more and more weight on the barbell, you start lifting the barbell with worse and worse technique.
Yeah, and that is what you don't want.
No.
You define your exercise. Okay, this is my bench press. This is what I do every time, no matter the weight. And if I can't do this, the weight is too heavy and I need to back down.
Yeah.
So yeah, put that technique first. Now, if we get into like exceptions to this rule, apart from just using full range of motion, it is that we don't always know what a good technique is, at least from an injury perspective, to some extent from a performance perspective, but that's usually just sorted out by watching what the world-class athletes do. But in terms of injury, we've seen a trend shift from when you and I began podcasting in our Swedish podcast about 10 years ago. I think we were at like the peak at the time for determinism in terms of how you perform the exercise and the injury risk. Like if you deadlifted with a bent spine, everyone and their mother, and probably you and I, were certain that, that is a high-risk technique. You should lift with a straight back instead. And now the pendulum is swinging to the other side, at least for some of us, with a good dose of humility in that we don't really know if the injury risk is greater with that technique or not.
Yeah. I mostly agree. I still think when you're trying to find your technique, it helps to film a lot of your working sets and look back at it. And if you look at the film and say to yourself, I wouldn't want to share this on social media, people would laugh at me, then you're probably not doing a correct movement. So start filming your warm-ups when it's light and easy, and then progress to your working sets. Do they look the same? They don't have to be completely identical. If we're talking about this squat, having a heavy weight on your back will shift how the movement looks compared to having almost no weight on your back. Just because of physics. You can explain this better, Daniel. But we're going to do an episode on the squat pretty soon.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about that then.
Exactly.
But keep filming yourself.
Yeah, and another thing is that, well, there's that tricky saying that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence of an effect.
Yeah.
So just because we don't know what a good technique is doesn't mean that there isn't an optimal technique. And we can also still make recommendations. And I mean, if a beginner wants to begin deadlifting, well, we have to say something to them. So what you and I and our company kind of has landed on in our instructions is that what we say is what we believe is the best practice. And it's a good starting point and our recommended way of beginning with an exercise, and then you can do whatever the heck you want. But we recommend you begin here. If it feels weird or off, then adjust like your stance or grip width or positions to find something that is comfortable. And there are still a bunch of principles for the exercise techniques that you can apply. And we will mention one that is that a long range of motion is often a good bet. It's often more effective for developing strength and building muscle. Another principle is to make sure that it actually hits your target muscle. You're not doing anything weird in the movement that shifts the work to some other muscle. You have control in the movement is another important principle, both on the eccentric and the concentric, that it is stable, at least unless like balance is your goal, and that you're doing it the same every time, and it feels generally good and performs well. That it doesn't hurt you and like impact your consistency and your regularity in training. So yeah, adhere to those principles if you're not sure.
But also, if you're a beginner listening to this, don't be too scared of actually putting some weight on the barbell. You're not gonna fall down dead in the gym. You're not gonna break your body from having a slightly bent spine in the deadlift or seeing a butt wink in the squat. It's not gonna cause you serious injuries, most likely. But if it does, don't sue us. It was your own fault.
Like if I'm instructing a beginner, I might aim for a straight spine in the deadlift, but if there's a bend, I don't panic over it anymore. I might have been more worried 10 years ago. Now I know that this probably doesn't matter at all.
No, there's a certain category out there of fitness influencers who sell the idea that you need to be perfect in every aspect before you're even allowed to lift, which I don't subscribe to at all.
Yeah.
This adding months of silly practice just to perform a squat. I would like to have like a client or a couple of clients starting out at the same time with the other people following those gurus, and after a year see who has the stronger squatters in their teams.
But everyone's dead.
Oh, yeah. They might be dead, but they achieved glory.
Yeah, but no, that's a danger of this principle. And it's also one of the reasons why it's a principle and not an ironclad law.
Yeah.
And like many things, it requires you to keep two thoughts in your head at the same time. So you need to put your technique first, but there's also a point where the technique is good enough and you actually need to apply some progressive overload.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Yep. So those were our 7 principles of highly effective strength training. Coming up are the big 6. We are going to go over in the upcoming 6 episodes 6 of the, in our opinion, best exercises or best movements that if you do them, you will train virtually your whole body. You might still add some things on top of that, but this is like the fundamentals. So we're going to talk about pushing, pulling, squatting, and hip hinging. And for the push and the pull, we're going to divide them up into vertical and horizontal pushing and pulling. So, for instance, the bench press and the overhead press. And we're going to focus on the bench press, the squat, deadlift, overhead press, rowing, and pull-ups or lat pull-downs. But for some of them, especially, for instance, rowing, I believe, and probably a few of the others, we're going to broaden the perspective a bit. But even when we're talking about the bench press, most of what we're going to talk about in that episode is going to apply to any chest pressing exercise, no matter it being push-ups or dips or dumbbell presses or machine chest presses. So our goal with these exercises is not only to help you understand them well, because these are really good tools for effective strength training, but also that when you understand them, you are going to understand all the variations of them and what are the important points in them and which muscles do they work and so on.
Yeah, I noticed you didn't add any ab work.
Yeah, that is one of the missed ones, but you do get some ab work in them. But yeah, that's one that might be added. I already have my big ab.
Yeah, training your abs is for people that are too skinny.
No. But yeah, so in this episode, we're going to go over a lot of stuff. Technique, muscles works, tips and tricks, plus probably a lot more. So tune in for those. And in order to not miss them, make sure that you hit subscribe on this podcast.
Yeah. Please leave comments on the episodes. It's really fun to read them.
All right. Thank you for listening to this episode and good luck with your training.
Train hard, eat well, die anyway.